There are animals witches don't fear, and there are animals they deliberately use, not to scare you, but to quietly shut down your income. If your money dries up with no clear explanation, if opportunities reach the final stage and then collapse without warning, if helpers rise, promise support, then vanish at the last moment. This revelation is not accidental, because what I'm about to say was never meant to be spoken aloud. I didn't learn this from books. I didn't hear it from rumors. I stood inside the rooms where these decisions were made. I watched how targets were selected. I watched how finances were marked, traced, and restricted without touching the person directly. And the first thing you must understand is this. When witches want to ruin a person's income, they rarely attack the person. They go for the flow. Money is a current. Favor is a current. Opportunity is a current. And currents can be redirected, slowed, or quietly sealed. In those rooms, animals were never symbolic decorations. They were assignments. They were carriers. They were witnesses to agreements spoken in low voices, under rules that were never written down. I remember the first time I was trusted with this knowledge. I thought it was superstition. I thought it was exaggeration meant to intimidate newcomers, until I saw results that numbers couldn't explain. A business thriving for years. Contracts lined up, customers steady, suddenly unable to close deals. No scandal, no mistake, just delays, excuses, missed calls, and then silence. The target was confused. Friends blamed strategy, advisors blamed timing. But in the circle there was no confusion at all, because something had already been released. Not aggressively, not violently, quietly. I was told, this one doesn't scream, this one watches. Another said, this one doesn't attack the person, it waits at the gate. And that was the moment I understood. Income doesn't disappear loudly. It fades politely. That's how it's designed. There are animals assigned to watch entry points, who comes to help you, who decides to invest, who signs the final approval. There are animals assigned to follow movement, tracking where favor is supposed to flow, then standing in its path. And there are animals assigned to sit still, doing nothing visible, yet ensuring nothing progresses. When I speak now, I'm not guessing, I'm confessing. I remember being present when a name was spoken, just a name, no face. Then a second name, the business. Then a third, the income source. No shouting, no candles thrown, just agreement. And an animal was chosen. I didn't understand then why animals mattered so much. Now I do. Animals don't reason the way humans do. They don't question instructions, they don't feel guilt. They simply carry out what they are assigned to hold, guard, or delay. That's why people wake up one day and say, everything was working, then it wasn't. That deal should have gone through. I did everything right. Yes, you did. But the battle you were pulled into never asked for your permission. What I'm sharing is not meant to create fear. It's meant to explain patterns you were never given language for. Because once you can name what is happening, you stop blaming yourself for things you didn't cause. And this is only the beginning. There are 4 animals that were used most often when income needed to be restricted without alerting the target. Each one had a role. Each one was sent for a specific type of financial blockage, and each one leaves a trail, if you know what to look for. I stayed silent for a long time. Not because I wanted to, because speaking came with consequences. But silence keeps people confused, and confusion keeps them vulnerable. So listen carefully. What comes next is not theory, it's exposure. And once exposed, these operations lose their advantage, because light doesn't rush, it reveals. And I'm not talking about superstition. I'm not talking about village stories. I'm talking about systems I personally participated in. Most people are praying against poverty, while ignoring the spiritual instruments used to enforce it. That was the part that shocked me the most. When I was inside, people thought lack was random. They thought loss was seasonal. They thought delay was normal. But inside those rooms, delay had a timetable. We didn't guess outcomes. We monitored them. I watched prayers rise from targets who were sincere, disciplined, hardworking, generous, and still nothing moved. Not because the prayers were weak, but because something else had already been placed along the route. You see, warfare around money is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't break doors. It changes access. In those systems, we studied patterns first: who prospered easily, who attracted helpers, who recovered quickly after losses. Then we adjusted the flow. I remember being told, never attack the gift, control the gate. That sentence stayed with me. Because once the gate is controlled, effort becomes exhausting. Ideas come, but funding doesn't follow. Meetings happen, but decisions stall. Doors open and refuse to lock into place. And people start questioning themselves. Inside the structure, animals were assigned according to function. Not randomly, not emotionally, strategically. Some were used to monitor, some to delay, some to sit where agreements were meant to pass through. I was there when reports came back, not in words, in outcomes. This one hasn't received payment yet. This one's contract has been postponed again. This one is borrowing despite working harder than before. No celebration, just confirmation. That's when the weight of what I was part of finally reached me. Because these weren't criminals. These weren't careless people. They were targets. And most of them were fighting the wrong battle, rebuking poverty, fasting against lack, while the enforcement tools remained untouched. That's why this revelation matters. Because once you understand the system, you stop fighting shadows. And when the system is exposed, its hold weakens. What I'm sharing next will make this clearer. Because each animal used had a signature. And once you recognize the signature, you can no longer be kept unaware. Before I left witchcraft, I was trained how income is attacked spiritually, not randomly, but symbolically. This was not chaos, it was structure. Every action had order. Every assignment had rules, and nothing was released without purpose. Animals were never chosen by chance. Each one represented a financial function. That training didn't begin with rituals. It began with understanding systems. We were taught that money moves the same way breath moves. In and out, through channels. Interrupt the channel and the breath weakens. Interrupt the flow and income follows. So animals were selected based on what needed to be affected. Some were linked to access, who opens doors, who approves, who signs. Some were linked to movement, speed, delays, repeated postponements. Some were linked to visibility, whether your work is seen, recommended, or ignored. And some were linked to retention, money that comes in but never stays. I was shown how each animal symbol matched a specific financial role. Not emotionally, functionally. One elder said something I will never forget. If you understand what the animal represents, you don't need to touch the person. That sentence stayed with me, because I watched it work. Targets were not cursed loudly. They were studied, their profession, their income source, their peak seasons, their helpers. Then an animal was assigned to interfere with that exact point. If someone relied on contracts, approval was targeted. If someone relied on sales, movement was targeted. If someone relied on promotion, visibility was targeted. And once the assignment was made, everyone relaxed because the system would handle the rest. That's why people say it feels like something is blocking me. I keep getting close. I don't understand what's wrong. They're not imagining it. I'm speaking now because I was trained to recognize these patterns, and I later saw how destructive they were to people who never knew they were being watched. Leaving witchcraft didn't erase what I learned. It exposed it. And what I'm about to reveal next is the part we were warned never to explain publicly. Because once people understand, the operations lose their silence. The first animal was always the easiest to assign, and also the most underestimated. Let me tell you which one it was, and why it was used first. I need you to listen the way I was taught to listen. Not with excitement, but with awareness. Because once this part was explained to me, I realized why so many hardworking people never recover financially, even after prayer, effort, and strategy. The first animal is subtle. Most people live with it. The second one operates at night. The third is why businesses collapse suddenly. And the fourth is rarely used, but devastating. I was warned early, do not speak about them in order unless you're ready to finish the confession. So I'll go carefully. The first animal is not sent to destroy, it is sent to normalize delay. This one blends into everyday life. You see it around homes, near food, near waste. It thrives where people adjust instead of confront. When it is assigned, nothing looks wrong at first. Money still comes, just slower. Clients still call, just less committed. Ideas still form, but execution feels heavy. Inside the circle, this animal was called the conditioner, because its assignment was simple. Make the target accept reduction as normal. I watched people live with this for years. They didn't know they were under pressure, they just lowered expectations. That's why it's effective. It doesn't shock you, it trains you. The second animal operates at night. This one was never released during the day, never. Its assignment had nothing to do with effort. Only rest, sleep, dreams, mental clarity. When this one is active, people wake up tired after full sleep. They forget ideas they were sure about the night before. They second-guess decisions that once felt clear, and opportunities requiring alertness quietly slip past. I remember the rule spoken clearly. If you weaken rest, income will follow. Because tired minds make delayed decisions. Delayed decisions miss windows, and missed windows don't announce themselves. The third animal is the reason businesses collapse suddenly. This one is not gradual, it waits, it allows growth, expansion, confidence. And only when systems are built, staff hired, rent paid, expectations raised, does it move. Its role is interruption. Suppliers fail, partners change terms, regulations appear unexpectedly. One disruption triggers another. From the outside, it looks like bad timing. Inside the circle, timing was the point. I remember seeing this animal chosen and thinking, why wait so long? The answer came calmly, because collapse hurts more when there was something to lose. And then there is the fourth. This one was rarely used, not because it was weak, but because it attracts attention. This animal is never assigned alone. It is sent only when a person's income has spiritual weight, when their prosperity would empower others. When this one is released, helpers turn into obstacles. Mentors withdraw without explanation. Doors close permanently, not temporarily. And here is the part I struggled to accept. This animal does not attack finances directly. It attacks access. Access to rooms you were meant to enter. Access to conversations that would change your level. Access to people who would say your name when you're not present. Once access is sealed, effort becomes exhausting. I saw this used sparingly, and every time there was silence afterward. No celebration, no laughter, because even among witches, this one was respected. That's why I'm exposing it last. Because once you recognize its pattern, you stop chasing solutions in the wrong places. What I'm sharing isn't meant to leave you alert. It's meant to leave you informed. The battle around income is rarely loud. It's administrative. It's strategic. It's patient. And the reason this confession matters is simple. When you finally see how something works, you stop wondering why it keeps working against you. Stay with me, because the most dangerous one hasn't been fully revealed yet. And when I speak its role plainly, many things in your life will suddenly make sense. By the time I understood why animals were chosen, I was already inside too deep to pretend it was imagination. In witchcraft, symbols are not decorations. They are agreements given form. A symbol is chosen because it already carries authority in the unseen. And animals carry authority without negotiation. Each animal represents a function, not an idea, not a metaphor. A function. Some represent access, some represent restraint, some represent delay, some represent consumption. When witches speak, they don't just speak words, they assign roles. Animals are used because they are containers. They can hold instructions, they can hold boundaries, they can hold permissions. Humans question. Animals execute. That is why they are used when subtle control is needed. Money responds to authority, not effort alone, not intelligence alone. Authority. You can work hard and still be blocked if something else has been given permission to stand where your increase should pass. I learned this during one assignment that still follows me. I remember a business owner we were assigned to, hardworking, praying, honest. He didn't cheat customers, he didn't cut corners, he wasn't lazy. From the outside, there was no obvious weakness to exploit. That confused many of the newer members. Some whispered, "Why him?" Others assumed the work wouldn't succeed. But the elders weren't concerned, because effort was never the target. Every deal he pursued reached the same stage. Negotiations went smoothly, numbers aligned, approval was implied. Then, delay. A document needed one more signature. A partner suddenly became unavailable. A decision was postponed just a little longer. Again and again. No rejection, just waiting. And waiting quietly drains hope. Inside the circle, frustration wasn't allowed. Silence was the rule. I remember sitting there listening as his income source was spoken aloud. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. The instruction wasn't to destroy him, it was to slow the flow. That phrase stayed with me. Slow the flow. An animal was chosen not to attack, but to occupy. To stand where movement should happen, to remain unseen, unchallenged. No sickness was sent, no accident, no scandal. From the outside, nothing looked wrong, but every opportunity hit the same invisible wall. Weeks passed, then months. The business owner began questioning himself, changed strategies, worked longer hours, prayed harder. None of it touched the blockage, because it wasn't his effort that was attacked. It was his flow. That realization unsettled me. I began to see the pattern everywhere. People blaming discipline when authority was the issue. People blaming timing when permission had already been interfered with. People blaming themselves for battles they never entered willingly. That was the most disturbing part. The sabotage was silent. No warning signs, no dramatic collapse, just a steady restriction that made capable people look ineffective. And inside those rooms, that outcome was considered successful. I remember asking carefully why animals were preferred for this kind of work. The answer was short, because they don't announce themselves. That was when I understood this wasn't about fear, it was about control. And control works best when the target never realizes what is happening. What comes next matters. Because each animal used had a specific financial assignment, and each one leaves evidence, not obvious but consistent. Once you recognize the pattern, you stop guessing. And once guessing stops, authority shifts. This is where the exposure begins. If you're still with me, type "I'm aware" in the comments, because awareness is the first thing they try to prevent. Once a person understands what is happening, the advantage shifts. And that is why what I'm about to confess was guarded so carefully. After that first animal was chosen, I expected chaos. I expected noise. I expected visible disruption. None of that happened. What happened instead was patience. Weeks passed. The target kept working. They kept pushing. They kept believing the next call would be the breakthrough. Inside the circle, there was no rush. Because the assignment wasn't to destroy effort, it was to exhaust hope. I was told something that night I never forgot. People quit when nothing responds. That was the strategy. The animal assigned wasn't sent to attack customers. It wasn't sent to break equipment. It was positioned near decisions, approvals, signatures, confirmations, places where progress needs agreement. And slowly everything required an extra step. One more meeting, one more review, one more delay. The target began to doubt themselves. They changed plans. They blamed their pricing. They blamed their timing. They blamed their past. Meanwhile, nothing had changed in the physical world. Only permission had been restrained. This is something people don't understand about spiritual warfare. You don't always feel attacked. Sometimes you feel stalled. I remember the second animal being discussed. This one was chosen for people whose income depended on visibility. Sellers, speakers, creatives, leaders. The instruction was clear: reduce reach without resistance. And suddenly, messages went unanswered. Calls weren't returned. Recommendations stopped coming. Not rejected, forgotten. In the natural, it looked like algorithms, trends, or market shifts. But I knew what had been released, because I had seen the order given. I was still participating then, still justifying it, still telling myself I wasn't harming anyone directly, until a name was spoken that I recognized. Not someone famous, not someone powerful, just someone hardworking. That night my chest tightened, because the income source listed wasn't greed, it was survival. And that's when the reality broke through me. These operations don't target arrogance, they target flow. They target whatever keeps a person standing. The third animal was different. This one was used when someone kept recovering, when money returned after losses, when opportunities reappeared after delays. This animal wasn't sent to block, it was sent to follow. Every time favor opened, it was there, not to stop it immediately, but to shorten it. Short contracts, temporary success, income that arrives, then leaves. The purpose was fatigue, because tired people stop praying with confidence. Tired people stop expecting consistency. Tired people accept instability as normal. I watched this happen again and again. And then came the fourth animal. This one was rarely used. Not because it was weak, but because it exposed too much. This animal was assigned when someone's income was protected by others' decisions. Bosses, investors, gatekeepers. The instruction was simple: turn helpers into observers. Suddenly, people who once advocated went quiet. They didn't oppose, they didn't defend, they just stopped intervening. And in warfare, silence can be more effective than opposition. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. Because once you see how deliberately confusion is engineered, you can't pretend ignorance. I left with knowledge I wasn't supposed to keep, and silence I wasn't supposed to break. But testimonies aren't born from comfort. They're born from exposure. If you're listening and recognizing patterns, if your income hasn't disappeared, but it keeps slipping, if progress slows only at the final step, if support fades without conflict, you're not imagining it. And this isn't about fear, it's about clarity. Because once clarity arrives, resistance becomes possible. And in the next part, I'm going to reveal how these animals are detected. Not spiritually dramatic signs, but practical, repeatable indicators they never expected targets to notice. Stay with me. This isn't finished. The serpent doesn't block income, it bleeds it slowly. This is how it was explained to me the first time, calmly, almost casually, as if we were discussing weather patterns, not people's livelihoods. When the serpent is assigned, nothing dramatic happens at first. No sudden collapse. No clear loss you can point to. Life continues, just slightly off balance. You're still earning. Money still comes in. But it never stays. I saw this pattern repeated over and over, and at first, even I missed it. The problem never announces itself loudly. It whispers. A bill appears that shouldn't exist. A repair becomes urgent out of no small expense repeats, then multiplies. Subscriptions you don't remember approving. Fees you didn't plan for. Help you give that somehow never returns. Nothing big enough to panic over, just enough to drain. That's why the confusion stage lasts so long. People say, I earn well, but I don't see it. No matter how much I make, it's never enough. I budget, I plan, but something always comes up. Inside the circle, this reaction was expected. Confusion is part of the assignment. The serpent works best when the target blames themselves. I remember one case clearly. A man with steady contracts, reliable clients, nothing unstable on paper. Yet every month ended the same way, shortage. When his name was mentioned, the instruction was specific. No resistance, no alarm, just leakage. And an image was used that I will never forget. A container with a thin crack at the bottom, filled again and again, but never full. That's what the serpent does. Then comes the prayer stage. This is important. People under this operation almost always pray. They fast, they give, they try harder, and something interesting happens. There is partial relief, a sudden inflow, a surprise payment, a breakthrough moment. They breathe again, they say it's over. They testify. Inside we would wait, because the serpent doesn't leave when relief comes. It adjusts. The loss returns, quieter this time, smarter, more targeted. What once leaked randomly now leaks with purpose. Money disappears through relationships, through emergencies, through obligations that feel impossible to refuse. And the target starts to feel tired, not just financially, but emotionally. That tiredness was another sign we watched for. I need to say this clearly, and this is part of my confession. Many people thought they were failing financially. They weren't. They were being managed. Before exposure, the pattern was consistent loss. Not dramatic. Consistent. Enough to keep them working. Enough to keep them hopeful. Never enough to build momentum. But something always changed when exposure happened. I watched it more than once. Once the operation was identified, once the pattern was named, the control weakened. The leaks stopped multiplying. Expenses slowed down. Money began to stay. Not overnight wealth. Stability. Control restored. That was always the sign that the serpent's grip had loosened. Because this assignment depends on ignorance. Once seen, it struggles to continue unnoticed. That's why this animal is often sent first. It prepares the ground. It wears the target down gently. And yet, as dangerous as the serpent is, as quietly destructive as its work can be, it is nothing compared to the next. Because the next animal doesn't just touch money, it touches authority. I hesitated before speaking about this one, because this is where the damage becomes personal. The rat was never introduced with drama. No warnings, no raised voices, just a quiet understanding in the room. This one eats what has already been gathered. I watched people save for years, disciplined, careful, intentional. They skipped comforts, they planned for emergencies, they built safety where none existed before. And then, weeks, not years, not decades, weeks. Savings drained without a clear explanation. Investments that had held steady suddenly collapsing at the same time. Business stock damaged, stolen, expired, or rendered useless. Emergency funds touched first, as if deliberately chosen. What made it worse was how quiet it was. No announcement, no dramatic crash, just gradual discovery. A bank alert that didn't make sense. A partner who forgot to transfer funds. Inventory that no longer added up. Receipts missing. Numbers off by just enough to hurt, but not enough to scream. And the emotion that followed was always the same. Panic, because the cushion was gone. Shame, because people felt foolish for trusting systems. Silence, because explaining it made them sound careless. But they weren't careless. They were targeted. Rats operate in darkness. That's why these losses rarely arrive with noise. They happen when you're asleep, when you're distracted, when you're focused on surviving something else. Inside the circle, this animal was chosen when someone needed to be weakened without confrontation. Break their confidence, remove their sense of control, make them question their own judgment, because a person who no longer trusts their ability to manage money becomes easier to control. I remember a case clearly. A woman had saved for nearly a decade. No risky moves, no flashy investments, just steady progress. Her savings vanished through errors. Then her business stock followed. Damaged goods, unexplained losses, sudden spoilage. By the time she noticed the pattern, there was nothing left to protect. When her name was mentioned later, there was no urgency in the room, only satisfaction. That's when I understood something that still troubles me. The rat doesn't rush. It revisits the same place, over and over, until nothing remains worth guarding. People affected by this operation often say, "I don't know where it went. I checked everything. I feel embarrassed even talking about it." That silence was part of the design. Because when loss stays unspoken, it stays unresolved. And if this is touching something close to you, if you've watched resources disappear without clarity, type "no more loss" in the comments. Not for me, for yourself, because naming the pattern is the first refusal. But listen carefully. The next animal was considered more dangerous than this one, because it doesn't destroy what you already have. It positions itself ahead of you, and it makes sure the money never arrives at all. By the time the dog was introduced, the work was already halfway done. This wasn't used at the beginning of an attack. It was used when effort had already been invested, when progress was visible, when breakthrough was close enough to feel. Dogs were not sent to destroy, they were sent to stand. In the circles I was part of, the dog was called a keeper of access, a watcher at gates that humans never see. I remember the first assignment I witnessed involving this one. The target had worked for years. Qualifications, loyalty, consistency. Nothing fraudulent, nothing careless. Everything looked aligned. Then someone in the room said, "This one is almost through." That statement alone triggered the response, because when access is about to open, resistance is activated. The dog was chosen not because the person was weak, but because the person was strong enough to pass. Dogs were used as spiritual guards, not to attack you, but to block access. They were positioned at doors connected to approval. Interviews, final signatures, recommendations, favorable decisions. I watched how names were paired with outcomes. This one keeps getting shortlisted. This one keeps being liked. This one keeps reaching the final stage. And then the instruction came quietly. Put a guard there. What followed always looked normal on the surface. An application rejected without explanation. A promotion delayed indefinitely. A manager's tone changing without reason. Support that once flowed suddenly becoming resistance. The target would hear things like, "You're qualified, but," "You were considered, but," "This isn't the right time." Always polite, always reasonable, always closed. And the most painful part was this. The dog didn't chase them away. It allowed them to come close, close enough to hope, close enough to try again. That's how discouragement enters slowly. I remember one case clearly. The person had already celebrated quietly. They knew it was coming. Then the email arrived. Short, cold, final. In the room where the work was done, there was no surprise. Only confirmation. Because dogs don't need to move to be effective. They just need to remain. They guard favor. They stand between effort and reward. They make doors feel heavy. This is why many hardworking people start questioning themselves. They replay conversations. They adjust resumes. They work harder. But effort was never the issue. Access was. And here's the confession part I avoided for a long time. I agreed with this work once. Not because I hated the person, but because I was told it was defensive, that we were preventing elevation, that success needed permission. That lie kept many of us compliant. It wasn't until I saw patterns repeating across different lives that I understood the damage. People burning out, confidence eroding, hope thinning, all while being told, keep trying. That's why I say this carefully now. Many people think they're unlucky when access is being spiritually guarded. If you notice rejection without feedback, if favor turns to resistance overnight, if doors close at the same stage again and again, you're not imagining it. You're standing at a gate, and guards don't announce themselves. They just stand there until something stronger removes them. I stayed silent about this one longer than the others because exposing guards is dangerous. Once named, they lose their position. And now, the last animal. This is where the tone changes, because this one was never discussed openly. Even inside the circles, voices dropped when it was mentioned. Not out of fear, out of respect for how precise it was. This one is rarely exposed. The bird was never sent to destroy. It was sent to observe, watching, reporting, intercepting breakthroughs before they could fully arrive. The bird does not touch your money. It does not attack your hands. It positions itself above your progress. I remember the first assignment I witnessed involving it. The target wasn't struggling, they were ascending. Momentum was obvious. Meetings were happening, doors were opening, approvals were lining up in sequence, not chaos, sequence. And that's when the bird was chosen. Someone said quietly, "Let it see everything before it lands." That sentence stayed with me, because the bird's role was never to block effort. It was to report timing. Every time the target moved close to completion, every time a signature was about to be added, every time visibility was about to increase, the bird observed. And then it spoke, not with words, but with direction. What happened next was subtle. Another person would appear with similar ideas. Another business would launch slightly earlier. Another candidate would be recommended first. Another name would be mentioned before yours. You were still qualified, still capable, still approved, just late. That's the mark of the bird. I saw the pattern repeat too many times to ignore it. A woman whose proposal passed every internal review, then paused, then delayed, then replaced. A man whose promotion was verbally confirmed, then restructured, then reassigned, then forgotten. Nothing was taken from them directly. Everything was repositioned around them. And when confusion hit, the bird had already moved on. The bird doesn't steal money, they said. It ensures others arrive before you. That was its assignment. It monitored movement, not just physical, but favor. It watched who noticed you, who talked about you, who considered you at decision points. And the moment breakthrough approached, information shifted. Another name surfaced. Another option felt safer. Another timeline seemed better. You were never rejected. You were simply overtaken. That's why people say I was almost there. It was mine, then suddenly it wasn't. I don't understand how I missed it. You didn't miss it, it was reported. This animal specializes in final stage collapse. Not early failure. Not visible resistance. The fall happens at the peak, when confidence is highest, when expectation is settled, when celebration has already begun in your mind. That's why it hurts differently. I confess this because I watched how satisfaction followed these outcomes. Not loud celebration, quiet confirmation. It worked, someone would say. Timing was adjusted, and the bird was released from duty. For a long time, I told myself this wasn't real warfare, that it was coincidence, that people simply lost opportunities. But coincidence does not repeat with this level of accuracy. The bird leaves signs, repeated near success, consistent second place, endless almost. Breakthroughs that come, then stall, then reroute to someone else. And the worst part, the target blames themselves. They refine strategies, they overwork, they wait longer, they assume delay is preparation. Meanwhile, the watcher already knows when to move again. That's why exposure matters. Because the bird cannot operate once it's seen. Its strength depends on invisibility. Once identified, its advantage weakens. If this revelation is resonating, if you recognize the pattern, if you've lived the almost cycle more than once, type "I break it" in the comments, not as a ritual, as a declaration. Because awareness disrupts monitoring. Truth interrupts reporting. And once the watcher is noticed, the assignment changes. I didn't speak sooner because I was afraid of what would follow. But silence helps the operation continue. What you're hearing now was hidden on purpose. And this is why the battle around income is rarely loud. It's strategic, it's timed, and it relies on you never realizing what moved before you did. But now you see it. And when light reaches this level, it doesn't need noise. It simply rearranges everything. Freedom didn't come from shouting. It didn't come from confrontation. And it didn't come from trying to fight what people couldn't see. It came the moment awareness met authority. I remember the first time I watched it break. Not explode, not collapse dramatically. Break. It happened quietly, and that's what stunned everyone in the room. For years, the system worked because people didn't know what they were reacting to. They were tired, anxious, overworking, adjusting strategies, blaming timing. All the while, something unseen was feeding on their uncertainty. But the moment a person saw it, truly saw it, the atmosphere shifted. Exposure was always the first fracture, not naming every detail, not hunting for every source, simply recognizing, this didn't start with me, and it doesn't end with me. When people stopped internalizing the blockage, the grip weakened. I watched targets who had been stuck for years suddenly stop panicking. They didn't rush, they didn't over-explain, they didn't beg opportunities to return. They stood differently. And that's when the second break happened. Renouncing agreements didn't look dramatic. There were no long speeches, no scenes. It was internal and firm. People withdrew consent they never knowingly gave. They stopped partnering with pressure. They stopped aligning their emotions with loss, delay, and fear. Inside the circles, we always knew this truth. These operations depend on cooperation, conscious or unconscious. Once cooperation ended, enforcement weakened. I remember one case clearly, a person who had been targeted through their business for over 7 years. Every expansion stalled, every investor delayed, every contract almost signed, then paused. The moment they stopped agreeing with the delay as their season, everything shifted. Not overnight wealth, not instant applause, but movement returned, calls resumed, responses came back. Doors that had been strangely quiet began opening without explanation. And inside the circle there was confusion, because nothing new had been sent, yet nothing was holding anymore. That's when I understood the third fracture. Consistent alignment, not emotional highs, not reactive moments. Consistency. People who broke free didn't keep revisiting the fear. They didn't keep rehearsing the loss. They aligned their decisions, expectations, and posture with forward movement, calmly, steadily. Alignment starved the system. What once fed on reaction found nothing to attach to. And here is the part most people never hear. Once awareness locks in, once authority is reclaimed, once alignment becomes steady, the power doesn't argue, it withdraws. Because it was never sustained by strength. It was sustained by obscurity. That's why exposure changes everything. I didn't leave this life because I became afraid. I left because I saw the limits. I saw how easily the advantage disappeared once people understood what was happening. And that's why this revelation matters. If your income has been delayed in patterns that never made sense, if effort kept increasing while results stayed frozen, if the blockage felt organized instead of random, understand this clearly. Once you see it, once you stop agreeing with it, once you align consistently, the hold breaks. Not loudly, not violently, but permanently. What I've shared today is only one layer, and I need you to understand why I'm stopping here. Because what you've heard so far deals with carriers, things that move, watch, wait, and restrict. But that is never where these operations end. In the places I came from, animals were only the beginning of a wider system. They were the visible assignments, the part that could be explained without breaking deeper rules. Behind them were other elements, quieter ones, that shaped timing, access, and response. I remember the moment I learned this wasn't just about what was released, but when it was released. Certain days were chosen carefully, not randomly. Days when resistance was low. Days when decisions were more easily delayed. Days when people were more likely to second-guess themselves without knowing why. I watched dates change on documents for no logical reason. Meetings postponed again and again. Approvals stuck under review with no objections listed. In the circle, nobody was surprised, because the calendar had already been addressed. Then there were objects. Small things most people would overlook. Items that never looked threatening Things placed where attention rarely lingers. Offices, doorways, vehicles, work tools. They weren't meant to harm. They were meant to anchor. To hold an instruction in place so that even if one assignment failed, another remained active. And then there were sounds. This is the part many people struggle to accept, because sound doesn't leave fingerprints. Certain tones were used not to summon, but to confirm, to signal that an instruction had been received, to reinforce what had already been sent out. I remember hearing one of those sounds once, long after an operation had already started. Nothing dramatic happened, no reaction in the room, but within weeks, the target's final opportunity collapsed, again, at the last stage. That was when I stopped telling myself these things were coincidences. That was when the weight of what I had been part of settled fully. And that is why I'm careful now. Because exposure is powerful, but timing matters. What you've heard today explains patterns many people experience but can't name. Repeated financial near misses, helpers who pull away suddenly, income streams that dry up without conflict, progress that halts right before breakthrough with strength. These aren't always natural cycles. Sometimes they are managed. I'm sharing this not to alarm you, but to prepare you. Because when you know the structure, you stop fighting the wrong battles. You stop blaming effort, intelligence, or worth, and you start protecting access. There are more layers, objects, days, sounds, and rules governing how they interact. But those require their own space. For now, I want you alert, not overwhelmed. Pay attention to patterns, notice repetition, watch where things stall, not where they start, and understand this clearly. Silence is how these systems stay effective. Awareness is where they weaken. What comes next will connect the pieces even further. And when it does, many things you've lived through will finally make sense. Until then, stay watchful. Light doesn't panic, it reveals. I didn't arrive at this point easily. There were nights I replayed every moment in my mind, every instruction I followed, every meeting I attended, every agreement I witnessed but didn't stop. I carry the weight of knowing how quietly lives were delayed while the world told them to try again. That's why I speak now. Because warfare doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like unanswered emails. Sometimes it looks like contracts that never get signed. Sometimes it looks like money that should arrive, but never does. I've shared what I was shown. I've confessed what I participated in. And I've revealed what was hidden behind normal explanations. Not to alarm you, but to free you from confusion. If you've listened this far, it means something in your spirit recognized the pattern. Recognition is the first door that opens. Awareness is the second. You are not powerless because you now understand the rules that were used against you. And once rules are exposed, they lose their grip. So don't rush, don't panic, just stay awake. If this revelation helped you name what you couldn't explain before, like this video so others don't stay unaware. If you want more exposure, not noise, not fear, but clarity, subscribe, because exposure brings freedom. And remember, light doesn't panic, it reveals.